All right. So this is kind of what I'm hoping that we will cover in the next hour. We're going to talk about the components of a comprehensive worksite wellness policy. With that worksite wellness, just like anything else that we're trying to ingrain as part of our work culture, policy should ultimately be a goal, because we want something that's going to live on. If you or the person who's running the wellness committee ends up changing positions or leaving, we don't want that work to stop. Or if other administrators or decision makers leave the organization, again, we just want to make sure that this is so ingrained as a part of how we do business that it doesn't necessarily matter if some of the players change. Also, as there's other staff turnover, that it just becomes what people expect when they are onboarded into the organization. So today we're going to talk more about policy. As promised last time, we're going to drill down more on the mental health aspect, since that is something that seems very relevant and timely right now as part of worksite wellness. And then we're going to talk about how to set and achieve goals and kind of what those next steps are. Okay, so last month we asked you to think about some things and do a little bit of homework before we join today. So I would love, people can either unmute themselves or if they want to write in the chat, and Christy will share. So since we met in November, what's happening with your Worksite Wellness Committee? There's no wrong answer. So if you haven't gotten started, that's okay. You can tell us that. If you've just gotten started kind of identifying or maybe doing some recruiting, or have you had a meeting since November? So what's happening with Worksite Wellness at your particular place of work? Did anybody do any investigation into employee assistance program, or find out if there are any other wellness incentives, maybe either through your health insurance or just that your organization participates in? Any other incentives for employees? Were you able to complete a staff survey, kind of that needs assessment piece? And if you did, what did you learn? Did you get any surprising feedback? And were you able to identify some community resources to promote to your staff? So I see it looks like a few people are putting some things in the chat. Christy, you want to share what we're hearing?
Yes, Carrie Tucker mentioned that we do have an EAP. I am still learning more about it. I did conduct a Google Forms survey and had some good results that should help develop some plans.
Perfect. We're going to talk about what to do with that information today. Thank you for sharing. Anybody else? Oh, and I want to mention, I don't know if you're on today, but somebody did email me since our last meeting. And when I was out with pneumonia, I got kind of an avalanche of emails, and I've lost this message. So if I don't address your question today, or you want to put it in the chat or email me again now that I'm back to normal, pretty much normal, I will address your question. Okay, so regardless of where you guys might be at from our last meeting in November, we're gonna build upon what we talked about last time. So in my experience, in order to have an effective worksite wellness program, there are several components that should be in place. We started talking about these last time, and we're gonna talk more this time. So there should be some education, and that can look lots of different ways. So we talked about sharing information at staff meetings, or through a newsletter, or through those toilet talk, maybe informational infographics or things like that that you might post in common areas. But there should be some way of sharing information. So for our Worksite Wellness Committee, every month we choose some sort of a topic that we're going to provide some information about. The topics can range. One of the easiest ways to figure out kind of some things that you might want to choose for a topic, we had a Worksite Wellness meeting yesterday, and people were asking me, where do you come up with these things? And I said, I Google it. So I Google, so we were planning for January. So January 2021 health observances. And it will tell you all of the different national observances. It's National Glaucoma Month in January. Who knew? It's Blood Drive Awareness Month. It's Birth Defects Prevention Month. So, some of those topics may be more or less relevant to your organization. So I usually bring a few ideas to the wellness committee. I ask other members to do the same thing, but I like to come prepared with some ideas just in case other people didn't get a chance to come with some other ideas. And then we talk about them and we pick one. So I try to make sure that the committee still picks, even if I'm bringing some ideas to the table. So for example, we work with a lot of kids and families. So the Birth Defects Prevention Awareness Month is a little more relevant to us than maybe in some other organizations, because not only are we educating our staff, but we're giving them information that they could then use to connect with their participants for their programming. We share a building with the Red Cross. So we decided that we were going to focus on promoting blood drives and educating people about any specific needs or changes to protocol during COVID when it comes to blood drives, because we think some people might be hesitant about donating blood or not sure what the rules are. But we also know there's a huge blood shortage probably connected to that, people's hesitation. So, you know, we kind of talk about, okay, what makes sense? What do we think is going to resonate with staff? And then we choose one educational topic. We try to talk about it at our monthly staff meeting, but if we have too many other things going on, sometimes it might just be something we could share over email or through a toilet talk or something like that. We always try to have some sort of an activity. The activity could be a wellness challenge, like some of the things we talked about last month, like the walking challenge or drinking water. It could be something like that. So it's December this month. We're not able to have our traditional holiday party at work the way we normally would. So instead, we're doing a virtual holiday spirit week, and each day there's going to be a different activity. There's a different theme. People can, if they participate, they'll get their name put into a raffle to win gift cards. And then if they participate in the games or activities and they win, again, they can get prizes. So that's kind of how we're carrying on that tradition. So that's the activity that we are focusing on for the month of December. Each month, we try to have something that people can participate in. Policy, I mentioned we're going to talk more about today. That should be a goal. All of this work should eventually wind up in some sort of a policy. And that policy should not be set in stone. So it should be a living document that you have some sort of process for reviewing and revising. For our policy, and we didn't always do this, but it's something that we have learned over time. And now we have it written into our policy that every 3 years, we will review the policy and make recommendations and updates. Doesn't mean that we can't review it more frequently. In fact, this year we chose to focus on that mental health policy piece because we really didn't feel like what was in our policy was representative of what we were actually doing, and we felt like it needed to be stronger. So we chose to review that and revise that sooner. But just as a practice, every 3 years, we'll take a look at the whole policy and make sure it's still relevant and see if there's anything that we think needs to be revised. So all of these things are constantly happening. They're never stagnant or static, including evaluation and feedback. So we talked last month about finding a way to collect some feedback from staff through that survey. You don't just do it once, you do it at least once a year. Maybe more frequently, again, if there's been a lot of change in the organization in other areas, you might need to do it more frequently. During COVID, it's a great time to check in with staff if you haven't done any sort of any feedback protocol in a while. We usually do ours in January. So as people are kind of thinking about their own personal goals, it seems like a good time. So we just discussed that at our meeting this week, that it's time for us to do our staff survey again in January. And then again, constantly evaluating, okay, we got this input from staff, we put this action plan into place, here's what we actually did this year, how did things go? What went well, what do we really like, what do we wish would be different, and what can we do to improve those things? And then how are we always communicating all of this to staff? So not just we communicate about our meetings, we communicate how to get involved, we communicate about the actual things that are going on each month, and making sure that people always feel like they have a voice in this process. So Effective worksite wellness should include all 5 of these elements, and they should all always be happening at some level in the process. Christy, I think I saw a couple things in the chat. Was there anything that people wanted to share before I move on?
Oh, I was just sharing what our organization's doing for our holiday this year, since, you know, obviously we're not going to be together, but we usually go to a local restaurant and have lunch, get the rest of the day off, and it's just wonderful. But this year instead, we're ordering lunch from a local place called Big Spoon Kitchen, and they do like pre-made meals that you can just reheat, and it's a lot of local produce and things. And so we're getting a meal from there, and then we'll have a virtual game. So it'll be pre-delivered, preset, and it'll be something. So yeah.
That's very cool. Yeah, I think that's the thing I'm probably most sad about. Aside from, I love everybody getting together. We don't often get to do that in our workplace, but the food I'm missing. We usually have a big potluck. So you guys are smart. You found a way to still include the food. We're not quite so lucky, but we will be doing the virtual games. Thanks for sharing. Okay, so we're going to take a few minutes now to kind of talk about what a comprehensive policy might look like. I am going to give you suggestions for what you would want to consider, but that doesn't mean that your policy necessarily needs to include all of these elements. The more comprehensive, the better, just because depending on your organization, you know, we want it to be representative of everyone, and we want it in knowing that that could change over time, right? So the current staff that you have, the current culture, might shift over time. So even though you're going to be revisiting your policy, you still want something that would still be comprehensive. So for example, one of the elements in a comprehensive policy we're going to talk about is breastfeeding. Now, you may not have anybody who is starting a family at your work site right now, but that doesn't mean that couldn't change sometime in the near future. It doesn't mean it isn't something that you should still be thinking about how to approach that specific part of wellness if that were to be the case. But that being said, some of these things just may not seem as relevant, or you may choose to revisit them at a later time. Okay, so these are all the kind of areas that a comprehensive policy might address. So food, physical activity, mental health, breastfeeding, tobacco cessation, physical health and wellness, and that would include cancer and chronic disease prevention and safety. So these are the areas I'm kind of going to give you some ideas of what you might include in a policy. And just to take a step back for a second, I would not suggest that policy be the first place that you go if you have a new wellness committee. Policy usually takes some time. It can be difficult in the sense that it may feel very strict or regimented or permanent, even though I'm telling you that it doesn't have to be that way. That can sometimes be the perception. So typically it's easier to start with the education and the activities, sort of put some of these things into practice and see how it goes and what the response is before putting it into policy. Once people have had a chance to experience it and see the benefits, or maybe see that some of their reservations were not actualized, then they're much more likely to accept something as a policy. So policy usually is a bit of a later step, but it's definitely something you should always be keeping in mind right from the get-go. Okay. So again, these are suggestions. When it comes to when we're talking about a food policy, these are the things you might want to consider. So what types of food are offered at meetings and events? If it's, if the idea is to promote worksite wellness, then you might have some guidelines or suggestions, or it could be even more, maybe they're actual restrictions, it's going to depend. But what do you want to set some sort of boundaries about what types of food are offered? It doesn't necessarily have to be saying that you can't have certain things, but so for example, in our worksite, it's that you have to offer certain things. So there have to be healthy choices available. You can't just have cookies and punch. There needs to be a fruit platter or a vegetable tray. There needs to be something, an alternative that's a healthy alternative at the bare minimum. And we have more specific language around that I can share with you. But you might want to think about that. This could be particularly important if you're engaging with the community. So there could be a difference between the food that might be served if it was an internal meeting or event versus if it was a community meeting or event. So what do you want? How does the food reflect the mission and the values of the organization if it's a public event? Is that different? In our organization, it's not terribly different. It's whether it's for our staff or for the public, we have certain guidelines, but we're not policing what people bring to lunch, right? We're only talking about if it's like a mandatory gathering. Is there a space available for employees to store and prepare their lunch? So we know that people are going to be able to have more options and probably be able to provide more healthy options for themselves if they have like a refrigerator where they can store their lunch, or there's a kitchen space where they could, assemble a salad versus no space at all. So the easiest option is to go through the drive-through at lunchtime. So what kind of accommodations can be made for staff? Is there any food sold on your premises? So that could be anything from vending machines to a full-scale cafeteria. And are there any policies around what types of food are sold? Again, is it about having certain options? Is it about not offering certain things? In our office, a long time ago, there were traditional vending machines, and we kind of realized at a certain point that they were not really a reflection of the mission and the vision of the organization, because part of our work is teaching people how to make healthy choices. So having a vending machine right up front, smack dab in the front of the office, was sending a really conflicting message. So first, the vending machines got moved to the back of the building, and then because they were in the back of the building, I think they also were a little bit less popular. So eventually they were phased out. Pre-COVID, we had a healthy vending area. I think I showed you some pictures last time where people could purchase healthy options through a vending area that the Wellness Committee manages. We're not able to do that right now during COVID, but it is something that we will plan to revisit after COVID. So that's something you could think about, is what if there are any foods sold, are there ways to look at including healthy options? And then does food get purchased for things? So I know some offices go to Sam's Club or different places, and they might supply different snacks for things, maybe sometimes for meetings. In our case, we buy a lot of food for programming. So part of our food policy is that people can only get reimbursed for foods that they've purchased that meet certain healthy guidelines. So they have to meet those healthy guidelines for our programming, but then, you can't go to the store and pick up donuts for a staff meeting and get reimbursed for them. But you could get reimbursed potentially if you bought a healthier option. So those are some things you might look at. Physical activity, these are some suggestions for areas that you might consider. So does your worksite have the ability to allow people to flex their schedule so that they could go to a fitness class on their lunch break or in the middle of the day and then come in early or work later? That's going to be really dependent on obviously your workplace, if that's an option. Are there any discounts available through your health insurance, your EAP program, for people who belong to a gym or another fitness program? And then what do you have on site to help people make healthy choices? Is there a bike rack if people want to ride their bike to work? Is there a walking path, or do you have information to help people with that? And that doesn't necessarily have to just be outside. We've helped a lot of places do indoor walking paths. This time of year, not everybody wants to go outside and go for a walk with the weather, or maybe you just don't have an area that it has complete sidewalks or that's safe or easy to walk. So maybe an indoor walking path and a map for people. What kind of fitness opportunities are you bringing into the organization? So are there on-site fitness opportunities like You know, do you have a 10-minute stretch break in the middle of the day? Or can somebody come on site after work and teach a yoga class so people could stay late and join some sort of a group fitness? Or do people go together and participate in things in other locations? Is there a community Zumba class that people could be encouraged to attend? And maybe it could be subsidized through the Wellness Committee. These are just some suggestions. We talked about monthly challenges, so maybe it's just providing those fitness challenges to keep people encouraged. And then I mentioned earlier, stretch breaks. Do we have some sort of a formal stretch break or informal stretch break throughout the day? Is there a policy every hour people are encouraged to get up and stretch? Something like that. Okay, mental health, which we're going to talk more about today. Here are some of the areas that we have. I said we recently revisited our mental health policy. We looked at some best practice toolkits. I'm going to give you some links for those. These were the areas that that we found should be included in a really robust mental health policy. So first of all, just increasing employee awareness of mental health. We know that there can be some kind of stigmas around mental health. It's not something pre-COVID, I think that a lot of work sites were talking about a ton. So really getting people to understand that this isn't, removing that stigma and having people understand that, you know, just like our physical health, we need to be talking about and taking care of our mental health. It's a universal thing. Another way we can do that, provide that education, is by celebrating Mental Health Awareness Month. So each May, can you just have some information available or find different ways to sort of celebrate what mental health means and what it means to be mentally healthy? How can we keep ourselves healthy? Promoting and encouraging positive mental health practices, particularly during COVID. This might be maybe being a little bit more lenient or understanding about working remotely. Christy and I were kind of talking together before we got started this morning about some of the challenges we have faced with our families. So being understanding and providing, you know, kind of normalizing the fact that we're all working under some unusual circumstances these days, and that there's things we can do, stopping to take a walk in the middle of the day, or doing some deep breathing or meditation, having a little yoga stretch break or stretching at your desk. So those are things that should be promoted and encouraged, and people should know that those things, that they're not going to look down upon for needing to take a little mental health break like that throughout the day, that's something that's going to actually make them more productive and be able to improve their performance. So making sure that employees are aware of the resources that do exist out there. So again, it could be through an employee assistance program if that's something that your organization participates in, but also just other community resources that might be out there. We're fortunate to be part of the Cornell University system. So there's a lot of resources that Cornell provides. And even though they go out in like a e-newsletter, oftentimes I don't know that everybody kind of reads through or there's so much information. So sometimes I'll pick out a few of those that that I think seem really relevant. They've been talking a lot about how self-care during the month of December and things like that. So I'll send those out in an email. Hey, did you guys see this? This looks like a great resource to check out. Here's the information on how to enroll, things like that. So when you find those things, making sure that you're sharing them. Highlighting how to access mental health providers. So this is something we also just recently did. So even though that information might be made available through HR when people sign up or during open enrollment, you know, you may, that may be a benefit that's included in your worksite, but that doesn't mean that people understand the process of how to access it. And if there is that stigma there, people may be less likely to take advantage of those programs if they're not sure exactly how to access. So breaking it down for people, you know, here's how you find out what providers are in the area. Here are some questions that you might want to ask. This is the different types of mental health services that are available. Here's what the copay is going to look like. You know, just break that down for people. So there's some of these words that maybe they don't understand. You know, if you're looking for a counselor or a therapist and it's listed under behavioral health, you might not realize that that's what behavioral health is, or you might think that behavioral health is only drug addiction services. So not all staff understand all of the language or the lingo or the process. So breaking that down in a staff meeting and or having someone from your HR team explain what these benefits look like can be really useful to people, and they'll be much more likely to access them. Also letting them know, again, if you have an employee assistance program, there are some other behavioral health services like counseling that could be available to staff free of charge that they may not be aware of. Christy mentioned this in the chat, finding those opportunities to still stay connected, even if we're not all in the office together at the same time. This is so important during COVID. What are some ways we can still do team building, having those virtual game days or spirit weeks, challenges, any of that stuff that just helps people feel like they're more connected to their employees. We can't eat lunch together the way we might have before, but I love Christy's suggestion of, finding a way to order a meal in and then, share it over Zoom, put your Zoom screen on and still have lunch with your coworkers. Anything like that. It's just so important to help people feel connected. Got a few more for you. This one I think is huge. So making sure that staff feel involved in decision making. That maybe that's not always appropriate or possible, and there's different levels of this, but for example, when things shut down this spring and a lot of work sites moved remote very quickly, what was the communication like for staff around that? Did people have options? Were they included in how things were being rolled out? Was there a chance to ask questions? How was it discussed? Or was it a very top down, here's what's happening, here's the protocol, and and by the end of the week, this is what you will be doing. Those can feel really different. Those are really different processes and can really impact how people respond. So COVID is especially, this is a time when that can be incredibly stressful. There's a lot of decisions people needed to make professionally and personally. If they didn't feel involved or a part of that process, then they may have not been able to really work to their best ability during that time. So I think that one's always something to keep in mind. How are decisions being made, and do people feel like they have a voice in that process, at least in some fashion? And then ensuring that supervisors have the resources that they need. So, we're not mental health professionals. We aren't able to, to diagnose or tell people what to do, but management supervisors should know what the protocols are, and they should be able to be responsive to an employee that has any sort of mental health concerns. They should know what to do and how to help that employee. Doesn't mean that they have to have all of the answers, but they should be armed with some information. At every step of the way, again, just encouraging open communication. I'm going to show you an example of this in a second, but one really simple tip that we've been trying to do in our office that I think has made a huge difference is just asking people how they're doing. So when you're having weekly check-ins with your supervisor, or when you're having team meetings or staff meetings, rather than kind of getting right down to business as we might have in the past, just giving people an opportunity to just kind of say, hey, what's been going on? Christy modeled that really well for you this morning by doing an icebreaker, kind of asking what was everybody's most memorable Thanksgiving memory this year. Giving people an opportunity to kind of talk about their lives and making that sort of not off limits. In the past, it might have been like, okay, we don't talk about our personal lives at work. And obviously there still need to be some boundaries in place, but just giving people a little bit more safe space to kind of say, whew, things have been really tough at home. We need more of that these days. And then really thinking about reasonable accommodations. So for some people, mental health concerns may be more pressing, and they may impact their ability to be able to do their job successfully. So working with the HR team to take so if an employee comes with a concern and makes a request for an accommodation, what is the reasonable accommodation that can be met? How flexible can we be with staff, especially during unusual times like COVID? Okay, So I'm going to stop sharing this screen and then start sharing another one with you a second. I want to show you an example of what a mental health check-in could look like with staff. So this is a little bit more formal than just kind of the how's everybody doing. So this was something that we did in a full staff meeting. So not just our small team, but with the whole extension staff. So there are some things that I have learned that you have to be mindful of when you are talking about, especially mental health. So because we're not mental health professionals, we can't diagnose employees, and we do have to be mindful of what kind of liability we're opening the organization up to. But we can still do mental health check-ins. So we decided to do this as sort of an anonymous check-in as opposed to people typing in exactly how they're feeling about certain things, but just giving people some space to reflect. So we asked people at this moment, which one of these do you best identify with? So are you feeling well right now? That means that you're feeling calm and confident, emotionally and physically healthy, socially and spiritually active, and able to effectively communicate. Now, depending on the culture of your organization or the size of the group, you could choose to do this differently. You could allow people to anonymously respond to each of these, or maybe they want to be able to voice it out loud. It's going to depend on your organization. But even just asking people to kind of think through these and letting them know that all of these, it's to normalize that any of these states of well-being or being are going on. We might be feeling these. So mild would be the next one. So you might be noticing some mild distress, difficulty focusing, loss of interest in some areas. Maybe you notice that you're just more irritable or negative, pessimistic at times. And this is a change from normal behavior. So you start to notice something's different. Moderate stress. So you are experiencing unresolved loss, trauma, wear and tear, and inner conflict. You might be feeling more isolated or having difficulty sleeping. You're noticing more stress, and that stress is more intense and it's lasting longer. And then maybe you notice that things are severe for you. So this is constant and disabling stress. You notice that you're suffering from depression or severe anxiety, and things are starting to suffer. So work is suffering, relationships are suffering. Things might start to feel like they're getting better for a little while, but then they start to get bad or get worse again. So kind of give people a little visual. So how have you been feeling over the last week? So right now I'm going to ask all of you to kind of look through this and think about where you would fall on this scale. And you don't have to share it in the chat unless you would like to, but just take a moment to reflect on where you're at. And then thinking about what made you feel this way. Can you identify why you picked the color you did on the scale? So then we give people some recommendations. So if you answered well, basically keep doing what you're doing. Keep trying to stay fit, eat right, relax, and stay on that path of mental well-being. If you answered mild, make sure you're getting enough sleep and find someone you trust that you can talk to. If you answered moderate, this would definitely be the time to consider talking to a medical provider, counselor, or some other community resource. So this is time to turn to a professional. And if you answered severe, then we would recommend that you seek medical treatment right away. So this was our employee, our employee health plan. So we, again, gave people some information about how to find that provider. We also provided another kind of drilled down PowerPoint that broke down the steps about finding a provider. And then this is a really wonderful resource that we used for this check-in, and then some of those other best practices that we've just been talking about. So through Kaiser Permanente, they put together this toolkit about as work sites were starting to return to work this summer and fall, kind of some things to think about as people were returning to work, that some of these mental health challenges had not gone away. The people were still, even though maybe the immediate shutdown had ended, that the residual feelings from the pandemic were still present for a lot of people. And then I just included just a fun little It's not selfish to take care of yourself. It's necessary. I think that's the message we really want to make sure we're sending. Okay, so here's some other resources. As Christy said, we're going to share out this PowerPoint with all of these links, excuse me, with you. So you'll have these, but these are some that I have definitely used as we've been putting together things. This last one here, this Monday campaigns, I absolutely love. It's a weekly newsletter that you can sign up for. And it includes all the different facets of wellness. So there's healthy recipes, there's, you know, all those things about, like, there's chair stretches, there's a lot of things to do working from home, that work-life balance, a lot of mental health resources in here. So there's just great information that comes out every Monday. I encourage staff to sign up for it, but we'll usually pick one thing that's kind of related to our theme, our educational theme, and share it out with staff. So if we were having a challenge earlier in the year to try to eat more fruits and vegetables this summer. So I would share out some of the recipes from here that I thought might appeal to people. So it's just a great resource when you're looking for those educational things to share. And then the first two here are just some wonderful toolkits for kind of putting together a more mindful mental health resources for your staff. Okay, I mentioned breastfeeding earlier. So there's kind of two different ways you can think about this. So it's breastfeeding accommodations for staff, but also for clients. So, you know, for example, libraries are wonderful places to encourage breastfeeding friendly environments. What are you doing to promote that so that moms know this is a safe space to come? I know here in our area, there's a lot of breastfeeding groups that meet at the libraries, which is fantastic. Do you have any sort of signage up that lets them know if they want a more private space to breastfeed or pump, where that space is located, and then how, you know, what kind of resources are available there? Is there an outlet so that they could plug in a pump? Is there a refrigerator so that staff can keep breast milk refrigerated if they're pumping throughout the day? Is there a sink nearby or a hand washing station so they can wash out their pump or wash their hands? So those are some of the things that you would want to keep in mind. Is there a comfortable chair to sit in? You don't have to necessarily have a full-scale designated lactation space. Not every worksite can accommodate that, but is there a small office space that can be used for that purpose when needed? Is there a policy in place that says that if somebody needs to use the lactation space, that, you know, will exit this area and make those accommodations as needed? So there's definitely some flexibility involved. It's not an all or nothing. There's lots of ways that you can accommodate breastfeeding moms regardless of what your space is like.
Hey, April, we're at 15 minutes.
Oh, thank you. Okay. Tobacco cessation. So again, it's going to depend kind of on your staff, but just thinking about, you never know who is going to be part of your staff in the near future. So what are the policies that are in place? Are people allowed to smoke on the campus or not on any of the property boundaries? Are there resources available to help people if they want to quit smoking? Do they know how to access those resources? And is there education provided to staff? So physical health and wellness, there's a ton of things that you can look at for this area. Basically, it boils down to providing education about when people should be seeing their healthcare providers for different preventative screenings. And then is there a policy in place to allow them to take some paid leave to be able to participate in those preventative screenings? Do they get any discounts if they participate in those preventative screenings? And again, just making sure staff understand the importance of all that. And then safety, something that may not always be thought of included in worksite wellness, but again, to make it more comprehensive, probably a lot of places are doing some of these already anyhow. They may be mandated to, so just rolling it into your wellness policy. So making sure that the workplace that you work in is safe and that staff know how to maintain those safe systems. They know what the protocols are if there was an emergency, and they have resources available for different types of emergencies. Okay. So you've got some feedback from your staff, you did the survey, and we've talked about some of the different areas that you might want to address. So now we're going to talk about developing that action plan. So an action plan is really just basically asking some questions and breaking the steps down into the smallest possible steps to achieve your goals. So these are some of the questions that you would ask when you're putting together an action plan. Okay, so what do you want to see occur? So when you get that feedback from staff, you would have a wellness committee meeting. You kind of review some of the feedback. You'll see what topics seemed really popular with staff, and then you'll make some decisions about which ones are the most popular and the most feasible. Those are kind of where you're going to start, your low-hanging fruit. So what would you like to see happen? So maybe that is putting up some signage that is going to encourage people to get up every hour from their desk. I'm just giving you a random example. So what are the smallest steps that would need to happen in order to break that down? So who can make the signs? Or do we have the supplies to make the signs? So maybe making signs is going to be the first step. So who do we need to carry out this goal? So somebody needs to kind of be in charge of this project. So you might end up developing a subcommittee or just asking somebody to be a project lead. This month we try to do some community giving in the month of December. So we're doing an Adopt a Family program. So we asked one of our wellness committee members who wants to be in charge of the Adopt a Family program. So somebody volunteered. So it doesn't always have to be the same person that's running your wellness committee. And then who else needs to be involved? So do they need some helpers? Also, who else needs to be involved might be, maybe we need to involve the executive director because they need to sign off on this. They need to give permission in order for us to carry out this activity. Or we need to use a conference room. So we need to make sure whoever's in charge of signing out the space that we involve them. Just think about who's going to be impacted and then who you need for help. It doesn't just have to be within your worksite. It might be reaching out to some other community partners to lend support. You need to think about when you want this to occur. So is it an ongoing event? When is it going to start? Or is it just happening this month? And then how long is it going to take from start to finish? Being able to evaluate your success is knowing when the goal has been achieved. So if we're putting up signs to encourage people to get up and move every hour, how are we going to actually know if people are doing that? So can we give a little survey at the end of the month to ask people if they change their behaviors? Can we put people's name into a raffle box each day that they achieve that goal? Or can we ask people to do some self-reporting? How are we going to measure if this was successful? And then what resources are needed in order to carry it out? So we're going to need paper, we're going to need to copy, we might need some prizes if we're going to award prizes, thinking about what resources we might need. And then how are we going to communicate all of this? So how are we going to communicate to the people we want to participate? How are we going to communicate to the people who are impacted? How are we going to communicate to the people who we need help from? So that is basically your action plan. So it's just kind of thinking through all of these questions, and it should be done as a group. An action plan should not be completed by one person and then tell people what's going to happen. It should be as collaborative as possible and with lots of people providing input. So through a wellness committee meeting, you could even have a meeting and then share it out with the larger staff and allow them an opportunity to give feedback before you roll it out. Okay, and we talked about communication. So in order to have this action plan actually really happen, we need some sort of like systems in place. So the easiest way to usually do that is through these wellness committee meetings. So coming up with some best practices. How often is your wellness committee going to meet? Or if you have some multiple projects going on, are the subcommittees meeting outside of regular wellness committee meetings? I recommend that your wellness committee meet at like once a month. But you could choose to meet more frequently if you have a smaller committee or you have a lot of projects that you're trying to get up off the ground, or maybe breaking into smaller subcommittees. Meetings don't have to be in person. They can happen like this over Zoom. They could even happen over the phone. Just kind of depends, but we have had really good success with having virtual meetings for the past months. Who runs the meetings? Is there a wellness committee chair? Does it rotate? Do you have other people who run the meetings? Do you pick a different person to run the meeting each month? There's, again, no real right answer here. And then how are meetings communicated? I think I shared this last time. I found a lot more success when I started announcing our meetings to the entire staff as opposed to just the same people who are coming each month. So everybody's on our wellness committee, whether they know it or want to be involved, how involved they want to be, but everybody's invited and involved every month, and then they can decide if they want to choose to come to the meetings. We've had a lot better attendance that way. So who writes the agenda? Is it the same person that runs the meeting, or do you have a secretary? Do you have other officers? Who's going to take meeting notes? And then again, how are those going to get communicated out? I share agenda and meeting notes with the entire staff, regardless of whether they came to the meeting. And then we give updates at our monthly total staff meeting. That's how we communicate. Okay, so we're at the homework part. This is the end of my presentation. So what I'm going to ask people to do for January is start to develop that action plan. So look at the feedback that you receive from staff. If you haven't done a survey for staff, do that. And then start to build an action plan. And then think about what areas you would want to include in a worksite wellness policy. So you'll have these slides to look at, and you can kind of think about which ones seem most applicable. Again, you don't have to include everything right out the gate. You can add to it over time, but are there a few that really seem to resonate that you think would make for a good starting place? And then thinking about January, choose a wellness activity that you think you could carry out at your place of work. Okay, so to wrap up, what questions does anyone have about what we've talked about today, or what the homework is before we meet in January? So our plan for January is to wrap up these sessions, is to really drill down on that action plan and then policy, helping you to write a wellness policy. So ideally, I'd love for everybody to walk away feeling like they have an action plan. They know what steps they want to carry out with their committee. It's going to look different for everybody, but we'll help you walk away with that plan and then a draft of a wellness policy that you feel like you could share with your staff and those decision makers to get started. Doesn't mean you have to necessarily gets adopted right away. You might choose to kind of still practice and put it into play before it becomes adopted as a policy, but you'll know what pieces you want to include and what steps you'll need to take in order to get that policy adopted. That's our goal for January.
Thank you to April for your expertise again, and excited to kind of dig into this. And if you have any questions, please reach out anytime.